the News Channel 5 network, this is MorningLine with Nick Barris.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on MorningLine. Nick Barris here on a Tuesday. As always, a good show on tap for you. Invite you to join in the conversation. As this morning, we're going to talk about some things. And as you approach a big election, a lot of things develop. A lot of things are discussed. A lot of things sometimes happen and no one really has control over it, but then it becomes a political issue. As we know, immigration, big issue here right now for both parties, and the president's been talking quite a bit about it. And one thing we'll touch on as we talk about the general politics leading up to the November election is the president's plan that he's kind of brought up about limiting, birthright citizenship. The idea in this country where is if you're born in this country, you are a citizen. Now that means if your parent comes across the border pregnant and then they give birth to you here, they may not be a legal citizen, but you become one. And that's something that has been a 150-year-old constitutional standard, but the president says he wants to sign an executive order reversing it. That's among other things. Against this backdrop, we have that caravan of folks making their way up from Central America through Mexico, making their way to the border, trying to, I guess you would say, get into the United States to flee harsh conditions in Honduras and elsewhere. That's one of the big hot-button issues for a lot of folks. The number 737-7587, as you see on the screen, local and national politics. That's the broad umbrella, but I thought we'd start focusing a bit on that. And with us to talk about politics, as always, does a great job from Vanderbilt, Professor Thomas Schwartz. Good morning.
Hi.
Nice to have you on, sir. It's good to see you again. Good to see you again. You know what? Politics. So much of it. And what did you think? The president talking about an executive order to limit birthright citizenship. And he says, in his words, look, it's ridiculous that America has this policy. Other countries don't, but someone can come here pregnant, give birth, and all of a sudden their child is a citizen here, even though they may be here illegally. So what's your take on this?
I think this is largely political. It is symbolic. The president is trying to heighten fears about immigration, particularly this birthright citizenship issue has come up because there have been stories in recent years about wealthy immigrants. Oftentimes this is focused on China. Wealthy immigrants coming here deliberately to give birth so that their children have American citizenship, but then going back. The idea being that certain people are taking advantage of it. On the other hand, there is also
what advantage would they have by doing that?
Having American citizenship. Having American citizenship.
And that's so interesting you would say that. I want you to finish your thought, but the idea of this is being, because what I heard, and before I moved here, I lived in Southern California, worked in the Los Angeles area, and there were issues there and frustrations among some parties in politics about how there would be illegals making their way across the border from Mexico with no money, not wealthy, but pregnant, just trying to get across and doing so literally minutes before their water breaks, so they could somehow give birth sometimes just across the border. And the moment they do, their child is an American citizen, though they're illegal and I guess technically have to go back. Yeah. And then we're talking about people with no money, but you're saying folks with who's abusing it more, if you want to consider that an abuse?
I don't think it's I think it's hard to say. I don't think the studies are clear how common this phenomenon is. That's one of the ways it got highlighted was this notion that there was wealthy tourism as well as this, you might say, more impoverished people who might be giving birth. The scale of the problem is not at all clear to me. It's one of those problems, though, that does dig in and leads to certain resentments that someone could do this and suddenly have the privileges of American citizenship because simply they were born on the soil of the United States. Many other countries do not do this. This is a simple fact. Other countries usually have restrictions in that you have to be a citizen or you have to also ethnically have been born there, as in countries like Germany and many others in Europe. You cannot be a citizen simply by being born on the territory of that country. And the United States is different. The 14th Amendment has made us very different in that you are born on the territory of the United States, you are an American citizen. And that has for a long long time been a very sort of, I think, a unique and for the most part, a good aspect of American legal practice, and has certainly contributed, I think, to the idea that immigrants will be naturalized as American citizenship. There is no blood test to be an American. There's no ethnic, no racial test. Simply being born here makes you an American.
Interesting. Yeah. Again, the 14th Amendment passed after the Civil War. It says, quote, all persons born or naturalized in the United States are citizens. All right. And the Supreme Court for over 150 years has upheld the rule for legal permanent residence, but has never decided a citizenship case involving an illegal immigrant or a short-term visitor to the U.S. So there's a little twist there. And so you have a situation here where I assume if the president signs this executive order, tries to put it into effect, lawsuits will be filed. It'll make its way through the courts, and eventually it'll be determined by the Supreme Court whether or not that executive order can hold water or not, which is going to take a while anyway.
It could take a while. So that's why I think this is kind of largely a political signal to supporters that the president will continue to be strong on immigration, which is also done by ordering the Army to go to the border in this. So it's all part of the campaign.
Yeah, that seems to be it too, because I do think if you took a poll of a lot of Americans, I think a lot of people maybe like the idea of America being open and as it is, but I think a lot of people, I think a lot of viewers of this program would say, yeah, why are we not like other countries? Why is it someone can just come here, have a baby, and that baby instantly benefits from all of our programs that we have here? Not that you want to, make anyone suffer or anything, but I mean, shouldn't there be some guidelines that it's not just that easy, because anyone can just come in and have a baby?
Right. No, and I think
that will gain some. I think a lot of people would say, well, I agree that isn't quite right, but can you give me some context as to, why it was, or why the Supreme Court has upheld that, and the idea behind the 14th Amendment as it was written, that it represents the idea that America is open and welcoming, or what?
I think you have to remember the 14th Amendment is passed in the wake of the Civil War, and it was designed, in effect, to give citizenship and full rights to African Americans who'd been denied that. So the context has to be seen in terms of the end of slavery and the desire of the United States government at that time to fully embrace all the people who were born here, including those who had previously been slaves.
You're exactly right. Now, that's very different from the idea of folks coming from out of this country on their own to have the baby. You understand the whole issue of slavery, and I see why that was done, and that was good. But now maybe have times changed.
Well, the interesting thing is, of course, the 14th Amendment comes at a time like with a focus on slavery and civil rights. Immigration was not a hot issue at the time the amendment was passed. In subsequent years, there have been, there were always concerns about immigration. There were certainly concerns in the 1870s and 80s, then the 1900s. We've stuck with this largely because of this belief that of the openness of American society, and that changing it is going to bring in all sorts of political questions. I have no doubt, though, that the issue of whether someone who is here illegally and has a child, that could raise that could be a Supreme Court case in which you could have some ramifications. But this is something really Congress should deal with, not the courts. But our Congress is so dysfunctional that it hasn't been able to pass any meaningful immigration legislation.
Okay, and real quickly before we go to the break, that kind of dovetails into the other immigration issue with this caravan, and the issue of folks coming across the border, whether it's a caravan or anyone else, these folks making their way up through Mexico from places like Honduras, where I've done some research myself. I mean, what are they leaving from? And just, I don't know, it seems like it's a lawless, horrible place where they're leaving, and I understand why they want to get out of there. But the thinking, in their minds, do you get a sense, and we've had reports with reporters who have been with them making their way up here, that do they think they can just waltz into this country, or do they understand that they might be accepted, they're hoping, as political refugees? What is the thinking? Who's leading this to make them think that they can just waltz on in?
Well, there are stipulations that they can ask for political asylum at the border because of the violence that they're fleeing, gang violence, politically driven violence. And we have a long tradition of accepting people on the basis of political asylum, so they can make that claim. Many of them are not really political asylum seekers. They're economic refugees from poverty and horrible conditions there. So this is the disputed issue, and the president in some ways is going to try to deploy forces, or the border is going to try to deploy forces to prevent them from making that asylum claim, or in fact restrict them to only going to certain places where they could make that claim, and that would also slow it down or prevent it. But many of these people obviously think they have no other choice, or they think that there will be this possibility by getting asylum.
Any things that tells you just how awful it must be there, knowing what they may be coming to. And I guess I heard this morning that the president may arrange, whatever the situation is, to set up tents or whatever in place when they get here, so that at least we can look into processing them. And I know there have been claims, many of them are unsubstantiated. You can't prove who's really in this group. I mean, are they gang members, or are they Al-Qaeda? There's no evidence of that, but you always worry. On the other hand, when I see a lot of the video, I see a lot of adults. I see a heck of a lot of children in strollers, and they're walking across Mexico. How bad must it be for that? And how are we going to address it? So, but again, against this backdrop, I think a lot of it's politics as well. So, listen, we'll take a break. What do you think? Those are just two of the big issues. We can segue from that and how they play in some of the races here in Tennessee, including, of course, the very, very close race. And if you don't know about it, you haven't been paying attention, because the ads run every other second on TV these days. The Senate race. It's amazing how different the Senate race. Really pretty darn dirty in the campaigning, the way it's gone, compared to what I view to be a pretty darn civil race between the two gubernatorial candidates. We'll take a break. Be back with your calls, your thoughts on all of this right after this.